The evening was folding into its quiet surrender when Clara Rose Whitfield sat alone on the splintered bench of the little railway station. The air smelled of coal smoke and brittle leaves, and the lanterns along the platform quivered in the restless autumn wind. She held a stack of papers in her lap, their corners crushed from her grip, their words heavier than iron chains. Divorce papers. They trembled against her skirt like the wings of a dying bird. She stared at them until the lines blurred through her tears, then lowered her head and whispered into the dusk, "I deserve to be alone." The words barely touched the air, yet they felt final, as if they had been spoken to the sky itself. Around her, the world seemed to echo the judgment she carried. The wind pressed dry leaves against the boards, the lamps hissed, and somewhere in her memory the voices of the town rose again. Poor thing, abandoned, cast off like she never mattered. Pity twisted into gossip, and gossip into cruelty. Clara had walked through the streets earlier that day and felt eyes cling to her, as though her sorrow had been branded across her brow. She had wanted to shrink, to vanish into the earth. And so here she was, on the edge of departure, praying the train might arrive soon and spirit her into nameless lands where her story had no power. But she feared, with a cold certainty, that shame would follow her wherever she fled. Then came a sound, not the shriek of steel but the quiet, measured rhythm of boots. Spurs tapped against wood, steady as a heartbeat. Clara stiffened, lifting her head. A figure moved into the glow of the nearest lantern. Tall, broad-shouldered, dust from the plains clinging to his coat, hat brim shadowing his eyes. She knew him at once. Wyatt Calder, the wealthy rancher whose name carried through every tavern and mercantile in the county. 30 years old, handsome in the rugged way of men who belong to open skies, rich enough that people spoke of him as if he were a story rather than a man. She had seen him from afar, driving cattle across his land or passing in a carriage, but never like this, close enough for the rough lines of his face to soften into something almost tender. Her heart raced. Shame burned her skin. She clutched the papers tighter, as though he might take them, read them, know her disgrace. She lowered her gaze, praying he would pass by without a word. Instead he slowed, then seated himself at the far end of her bench. Not beside her, but not distant either. He said nothing. He let the silence stretch, as if silence itself were a gift. For long moments there was only the wind, the faint moan of the telegraph wires, the small thunder of her heart. Then, without looking at her, he shrugged off his coat. He leaned gently across the space and laid it around her shoulders. Clara gasped, startled by the gesture. The warmth of it draped her like something foreign, undeserved. She inhaled the scent of cedar and leather, and for the first time that day her body stopped shaking. She wanted to refuse it, to throw it back at him, but her hands wouldn't move. They were tired of holding shame. His voice came at last, low and steady, carrying the weight of earth after rain. No one deserves to be alone. The sentence was plain, but it cracked something inside her. She wanted to argue, to say she was ruined, discarded, judged unworthy even by God. But when she lifted her eyes, his gaze met hers with a quietness that undid her defenses. There was no curiosity there, no hunger for gossip. Only calm and a strange certainty. She turned her face away, biting her lip to stop the sob rising in her throat, but her tears betrayed her. Then he leaned closer, not enough to cage her, only enough that his words brushed her ear like wind through tall grass. "You're coming with me." It was not command but invitation. Not demand but promise. Clara froze. The words lit terror and longing in equal measure. Could she believe them? Could she trust a man who spoke so simply to a woman broken so thoroughly? She looked down at the papers trembling in her lap. The signatures and seals mocked her. Slowly, painfully she loosened her grip. The sheets slipped from her hands, lifted briefly by the breeze, and scattered across the platform like feathers torn from a wounded bird. Her breath shuddered as she rose. Her knees threatened to fail her, but he was already standing, his hand extended, palm open. Not force, not insistence, choice. Clara hesitated. The voices of the town crowded her, sneering, accusing. Unwanted. Unworthy. Forever alone. But his hand was steady, his presence solid as stone. She reached out. When her fingers touched his, warmth surged up her arm, and she felt something within her stir, a small ember long buried beneath ashes. They walked together to the edge of the platform. The night deepened, lanterns flaring behind them, the world ahead cloaked in steam and dark. The whistle screamed, the train barreled in, and iron shrieked against iron. Clara turned once, watching the papers skitter along the planks like broken ghosts. Then she looked at Wyatt, whose eyes held no questions, only patience. She stepped onto the train beside him, and in that step she felt the first fragile shape of freedom. The journey unfolded in silence. She pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the lights of the town recede. Her chest ached, but it was no longer the ache of despair. It was the ache of change, of a soul stretching after long confinement. Wyatt spoke only once, when the train swayed through the night. "Home isn't always where you're from," he said. "Sometimes it's where you're finally seen." She closed her eyes, the words sinking into her bones like seed into fertile soil. By dawn they arrived at the ranch, a sweep of land rolling toward distant mountains, fields lit with morning frost, fences stretching into forever. The house rose solid and strong, its timbers carrying the scent of pine. Horses stamped in the paddock, cattle lowed in the distance, and the sky widened so vast Clara thought she might breathe for the first time. She was terrified. She was hopeful. She felt both as she crossed the threshold of his world. At first she moved through the ranch like a shadow. The townsfolk whispered louder than ever. "He took her in, the shamed girl. What does he want with her?" Clara carried their voices in her chest, afraid of being unworthy again. But Wyatt never pressed, never forced cheer upon her. Instead, he built her a sanctuary out of quiet gestures. He set firewood by the hearth so she need not go out into the cold. He left small bouquets of prairie flowers on the kitchen table, saying nothing of where he found them. At night, when she sat by the window staring into dark, he would pass, lay a hand lightly on her shoulder and leave her to her thoughts. Slowly these simple mercies seeped into her heart. Slowly she began to believe she was not merely existing but belonging. Winter passed. The snow melted and the rivers swelled. With the first flush of spring the land bloomed in wildflowers. One morning, beneath the budding cottonwoods, Wyatt placed a small wooden box on the table before her. Inside lay a silver ring, plain but gleaming in the light. He did not kneel. He did not speak grand promises. He only looked into her eyes, waiting. Clara's breath caught. Tears spilled freely, but they were not born of sorrow this time. They were the tears of a heart surrendering at last to trust. She nodded, her hands trembling as she reached for the ring. His fingers brushed hers, steadying her. That evening, in the little church near the ranch, with the mountains watching and the sky stretched endless above, they spoke vows before God and a handful of neighbors. No grandeur, no spectacle, only truth. Afterward, life unfolded not in thunder but in the steady hum of days. Clara rose with the sun, walked the pastures, tended the small garden Wyatt had fenced for her. The town's voices still rose, but their bite faded. She was no longer the woman clutching papers in the autumn dark. She was Clara Calder now, wife, partner, seen and cherished in ways she had never dreamed. In the evenings they sat on the porch, watching the horizon burn with sunset. She leaned against his shoulder, the weight of her head matched by the weight of his quiet devotion. "I am no longer alone," she whispered once. Wyatt turned his head, a small smile curving beneath the shadow of his hat. "You never were," he said. And so it was that a single night, a single station, a single whisper changed the course of her life. What had begun with broken papers ended with a home, not built of timber alone, but of dignity, tenderness, and the unspoken strength of two souls who had chosen each other. If you listen closely on autumn nights, when leaves scatter across forgotten platforms, you might still hear it, the faint echo of a cowboy's whisper, soft as memory itself, "You're coming with me."